Right now, 330 million people are going about their day. Someone in Chicago is stuck in traffic. A teenager in Texas is scrolling through her phone. A nurse in New York just finished a 12-hour shift. None of them are thinking about what holds the modern world together. None of them need to. But tonight, imagine every single one of them simply vanishes. Not dead. Not moved. Just gone. The land remains. The buildings remain. The highways, the bridges, the silos full of grain, all still there. But every human being on American soil disappears before sunrise. No warning. No explanation. Just absence. And within hours, the rest of the world begins to realize that something far larger than a country just went missing. To understand what actually disappears, you have to understand what America really is. Most people think of it as one country among many. A powerful one, certainly. But one nation among roughly 195 others on the planet. That framing is almost completely wrong. America is not just a country. It is the operating system the modern world runs on. And when an operating system fails, everything built on top of it fails too. The first thing that goes is money. Not American money specifically. All money. The US dollar is the reserve currency of the world. When countries trade oil, wheat, copper, or steel with each other, they don't use their own currencies. They use dollars. Every barrel of oil sold anywhere on Earth is priced in dollars. Every major commodity market operates in dollars. The moment America disappears, the dollar doesn't just lose value. It loses meaning entirely. Within 24 hours, currency markets worldwide freeze. Banks in London, Tokyo, Frankfurt, and Mumbai stop processing transactions because nobody knows what anything is worth anymore. ATMs go dark. Supply chains that depend on international payments collapse instantly. Store shelves begin emptying not because food disappeared but because the systems that move food stopped working. And then the internet breaks. Not completely. Not everywhere. But enough to matter. Roughly 40% of the world's internet infrastructure is physically located inside the United States. The servers that run Google, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and dozens of other platforms that the entire global economy quietly depends on, gone. Hospitals lose access to patient records. Airlines lose flight coordination systems. Banks lose transaction processing. Factories lose automated controls. The modern world is so deeply wired into American technology that its disappearance wouldn't feel like losing a country. It would feel like losing electricity itself. GPS stops working within days. The global positioning system is owned and operated by the United States Air Force. Every ship navigating open ocean, every commercial aircraft calculating its position, every delivery truck following a route, all of them suddenly blind. Maritime shipping, which carries 90% of everything humans buy and sell, slows to dangerous uncertainty. Ships already at sea continue cautiously. New voyages become far more dangerous. Global trade begins moving in slow motion. But the collapse happening quietly in offices and server rooms is nothing compared to what begins moving on the ground. America operates 800 military bases across 70 countries. Troops stationed in Germany, Japan, South Korea, Qatar, and dozens of other nations simply vanish with everyone else. The security architecture that has kept large-scale war between major powers from happening since 1945 disappears overnight. NATO loses its most powerful member. The country that funds roughly 70% of the alliance's military capability. Countries that spent decades not needing a serious military suddenly realize they are completely exposed. Russia, which shares borders with nervous European nations, begins repositioning forces within 48 hours. China, which has long considered Taiwan a matter of unfinished history, faces a calculation it has never faced before. North Korea, for the first time in decades, has no credible nuclear deterrent aimed at it. The world does not immediately go to war. But it begins moving toward positions it has never occupied before. And that movement is dangerous. Meanwhile, something quieter is happening in places most people never think about. Roughly 800 million people around the world depend partially on food aid programs funded or coordinated by the United States. The World Food Program, which delivers emergency nutrition to populations in Yemen, Somalia, Sudan, and dozens of other crisis zones, loses its largest donor instantly. Within weeks, the most vulnerable populations on Earth begin facing a food emergency that has nothing to do with drought or conflict. It has to do with the disappearance of the country that was quietly keeping them alive. American universities disappear too. Institutions that produce more scientific research than most continents combined. The laboratories working on cancer treatments, Alzheimer's research, new antibiotics, and climate solutions go dark simultaneously. Medical supply chains that depend on American pharmaceutical manufacturing begin running short within months. Insulin, chemotherapy drugs, vaccines, all produced heavily inside the United States, become scarce globally. The cultural silence is stranger than most people would expect. Hollywood stops. Every streaming platform headquartered in America goes offline. The music industry, which is centered in Los Angeles and Nashville, falls quiet. The billions of people who went to sleep last night watching American television, listening to American music, following American sports, they wake up to a silence in their entertainment that feels almost physical. For many people, especially younger generations worldwide, American culture wasn't something foreign. It was just culture. The background noise of modern life. And now it's gone. Countries that built entire export economies around selling to American consumers face an immediate crisis. China loses its largest customer overnight. Mexico loses the market that absorbs 80% of everything it manufactures. Canada, which sends more than 70% of its exports to the United States, faces an economic collapse unlike anything in its history. Japan, South Korea, Germany, all of them built industrial economies partially around the assumption that American consumers would keep buying. That assumption just became impossible. Here is the part that surprises most people. The countries that disliked America the most are not celebrating. The nations that spent decades resenting American power, American foreign policy, American cultural dominance, they are discovering something uncomfortable. American power was also American stability. The rules America enforced were rules that kept certain conflicts frozen. The dollar America controlled was also the dollar that made their own exports valuable. The internet America built was also the internet their own populations used to communicate, organize, and survive. Grievances don't disappear with the country that caused them. But neither does the infrastructure that country quietly maintained for everyone else. Within a year, new powers begin filling the vacuum. But filling a vacuum and replacing what was there are two completely different things. Rome took centuries to build. Its fall created a gap that took centuries more to partially fill. America built something Rome never did. A globally integrated economic and technological system so deeply wired into everyday life that most people never noticed it existed until the moment it stopped. The empty continent itself becomes a strange problem. 330 million people leave behind cars, buildings, livestock, and crops mid-growth. Cattle herds wander highways. Crops rot unharvested in fields across the Midwest. Fires start in cities with no firefighters to stop them. Ecosystems in regions heavily managed by human intervention begin shifting in unpredictable directions. The land does not go back to nature cleanly or quickly. It goes through something messier and stranger. And yet life continues. Humans are remarkably adaptive. New trade networks slowly form. New reserve currencies are debated. New military alliances emerge painfully from the wreckage of old ones. Countries that were once entirely dependent on American technology begin building their own infrastructure, slowly and imperfectly. The world does not end. It reorganizes. It suffers enormously in the process. But it continues. Which brings us back to the nurse finishing her shift in New York, the teenager scrolling in Texas, the commuter stuck in Chicago traffic. None of them were thinking about holding the world together. They were just living. But that is exactly how the most important things in the world work. Quietly. Invisibly. Taken completely for granted until the moment they are gone. America is not loved everywhere. It has made catastrophic mistakes. It has caused enormous harm in places whose names most Americans couldn't find on a map. History will record those things honestly. But the modern world. The internet you browse, the GPS that guides you, the dollar that prices almost everything you buy, the relative peace that large-scale war has not shattered since 1945, was built inside a particular moment in history, by a particular country, in a way that became load-bearing for almost everyone alive today. You don't have to admire it to depend on it. And somewhere tonight, in the ordinary silence of a country most of the world barely thinks about, 330 million people are going to fall asleep without once wondering what would happen if they weren't there. Now you know.